Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. Today, as ever, we are talking to Auto Trader to give us an update on the new and used markets. And joining me for this is Auto Trader's Head of Strategy and Insights, Marc Palmer. Hello, Marc.
Hello, James. Nice to see you again.
Always good to have you on. Thanks for joining us, Marc. We are sort of approaching that halfway point of the year, quite unbelievably. I mean, where does the time go? So it's probably quite a good time to actually review what's going on, the health of the market. How do you think it's gone so far, Q1 and Q2? Is it as expected or a little bit beyond your expectations?
Yeah, you mentioned in the intro there that we'll give you a view on new and used. I'll do new really, really quickly. New has been what we probably thought it would be coming into this year. It's been quite difficult, a bit of a repeat of last year, actually. Private market is broadly flat year on year. It's a long way off where it was pre-pandemic. There's a load of stuff going on, manufacturers trying to stimulate the market and so on and so forth. But broadly, if you're a franchise retailer out there trying to sell new cars, you've probably got similar challenges to what you had last year. Used is really where I want to focus. So just to come to your question on where are we at the halfway point, last month the SMMT produced its Q1 used car transaction figures. There's always a bit of a lag in those numbers, and they reported that used car sales were up 2.1% year on year, so a solid start in quarter one. At Auto Trader, we produce something which is more up to date, gives us a bit of a view on what's going on. We kind of calculate what we call proxy sold based upon what we see in the market, and it aligns really closely with the SMMT numbers. And what we've seen at the end of May is that transaction volume has gone really well. Actually, we think at the end of May the market's about 6% up year on year. So retailers had a good start actually to 2024. And we're seeing the same thing happen so far in 2025. So we think, a really big March, April was up versus last year, and May was also a good solid month for used car transactions. So actually, almost at the halfway point, market's performing really, really well in terms of sales and volume.
Marc, do you think that's just a little bit surprising because we're still in a bit of a cost of living crisis? Bills are still high. And we've been running headlines on Car Dealer as well, saying, look, consumer confidence is sort of softening a little bit. I mean, it would seem as though this is not having an effect on demand and interest in used cars. I mean, is that true?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. If I go back to some research we did last year, actually, we did some really deep analysis on things that drive a downturn in the new and used car markets. Lots of smart people doing lots of analysis and against different economic effects. So what happens when interest rates go up? What happens when energy prices go up? What happens when fuel prices, insurances, those sorts of things go up? And actually some bigger macroeconomic factors. What happens when salaries don't go up and those kind of things. And what we found was that a lot of those things, when there's pressure on household finances, do correlate to new car transactions. When people have got a bit more money, new car sales go up. And when they feel like they've got less money, new car tends to suffer a bit. We didn't see the same thing in used, actually. The used car market remains really, really solid and insulated from a lot of those economic factors because actually, for most people, cars aren't a discretionary purchase. You can argue that new cars can be a bit of a discretionary purchase. If I've got less money and I need to or want to change my car, then I can go and buy something. I can adjust my budget and do something different, but I still need a car. So what we found is actually that used cars and demand keeps on kind of rolling regardless of what's going on outside in the economy. And that has been definitely the case on the platform and what we've seen in terms of demand and interest. So May, for example, was the fourth biggest month for visits ever of any month, like the fourth biggest ever and the biggest May ever. So a really, really solid, really big month. And when we look at demand and engagement with the cars that we've got on the platform, that's also a really interesting story because what we've seen is actually whilst we've got all that stuff going on in the background, demand has been really, really strong. We look at weekly demand, and for example, cars aged 5 to 10 years old is actually interest in those cars is actually up 7% year on year. When we look at cars aged over 10 years, that's up 7% year on year. And overall demand on the platform is up. So yeah, a lot of that stuff going on outside doesn't generally affect used, and what we're seeing on the platform is still really really healthy levels.
Mm. I think it's probably fair to say, though, that there isn't a uniform experience going on at the moment, because we talk to dealers all the time, as do you, of course. We've even got a used car dealer who's the boss of Car Dealer magazine. But you talk to different dealers, and they're all saying they've got different different experiences. Some reporting very strong used car sales. Some say that they're actually struggling. I mean, why do you think some well, they're having these different experiences to each other?
That's a really good question, because actually we have the same thing. I was chatting to a few franchise retailers in the last couple of weeks, and some of them were just saying, "Great, we're having a great time. New is tough, but used is going really really well." And a couple of others were saying, "Well, you know what, used is a bit difficult for us." And some of that comes through in the sales volumes. And I just because I'm not going to sit here and say everything's brilliant and sales are up 6%. Why isn't everyone having a great time? And put your feet up and all that kind of stuff. That's absolutely not the case, of course. It depends which part of the market we are looking at and talking about. So just to give you a kind of a view on that, when I say that sales are up 6% year on year, and that's a great start in the first 5 months of the year, that's not the case for every age cohort of car. So for most of them, 1 to 3, 0 to 1, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, they're up kind of 4, 5, 6%. So quite pretty good news. 3 to 5 though is actually down year on year by between 5 and 10%. So if you're a retailer that specializes in selling 3 to 5 year old cars, and that's your kind of sweet spot, and it's a chunky part of the market, of course, then you will be having a different experience. And what the reason for that is because those cars, we've been talking for a while about the impact of the pandemic on supply and what's happened. 2.5 million new car registrations lost to the market. Now, when that first happened, that affected supply of 0 to 1 and then 1 to 3 year old cars. If it doesn't get registered new, then it never comes back as used. And that happened in the younger end of the market. That is now really, really in 3, 4, 5 and coming into 6 year old cars. So there are some retailers out there, the car wasn't registered new, then it can never be found again as used. So if you're struggling to source, you're having to then find different types of cars to fill spaces on forecourt. So the experience is really, really different. And I think that's the reason for some of those different experiences. You've got retailers out there now that have got struggling to source the cars that they maybe would have been used to sourcing. What's happened is then they're bringing in cars that maybe they're less familiar with. They're not sure how they're going to perform in the market. And what's happening is that they're getting different types of responses in the market. You're starting to see, kind of different brands, different fuel types, different ages. And when you look at it compared to what you would have expected from, 20 spaces on your forecourt, if the cars that are in those 20 spaces is very, very different, then the outcomes you're going to get are really very, very different. And that explains quite a lot of the nuance in the market. We're really seeing it in conversations with retailers. There's some of them are saying to us, look, I need some help in understanding why I'm not quite getting what I need from the market and what I want from the market. You're telling me that the market at a total level is up. Why is mine not behaving in quite the same way? And when we look at it and do the analysis, what we're finding is that the stock mix is really different. Maybe they've got more plug-in hybrids, or they've got more electric cars, or they're now stocking, many more older cars, and they're struggling to find out, how to sell and prep and merchandise all of those and price those cars to market. So there's quite a lot of retailers having to learn quite a lot of things pretty quickly.
Given this nuance in the market, I mean, what do you think dealers should be doing moving forwards for the rest of the year, do you think?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the fact is, the cars that are available to you to stock are the cars that are available. And I think that there are three things in terms of a checklist for retailers, three questions kind of to ask, actually. The first one is, do you have a plan in place for the changes in fuel type supply? So the mix of cars in the market is changing really quickly, not just electric cars, but also plug-in hybrids and also full and mild hybrids. An awful lot of the stuff that's replacing petrol, diesel's down, petrol's about flat, but the other three are going really, really strongly. Full and mild hybrid supply is up about 30% year on year. So are you prepared for the changes in the stock mix? Do you know how to merchandise those cars? Do you know how to price them? Do you know how to sell them? Of course, Auto Traders tools can help you with all of that stuff. Co-driver able to pick up those descriptions and what's important, and of course all the pricing tools, retail rating, all those things that are available. So what I'd say is, is the plan in place for the changes in fuel type supply is number one. Second thing, if you're not kind of seeing the results that you want or the results you'd expect, then the first thing to go to is the stock mix the same as it was last year? If you're doing a year-on-year comparison, you'll find that you get different results according to the age, the fuel type, and even the brand and the model of the types of cars that are in stock. They're all going to yield different results for you. So is the stock mix the same as it was last year is another question worth asking. And then lastly, I haven't touched on pricing, but what we've seen is a lot more stability in pricing in the last few months. We saw some volatility in the first half of last year. The first half of this year is pretty stable, pretty good. And I think that's a big thing for retailers with increased outgoings. Let's say since the start of April, of course, you've got national insurance contributions, you've got energy prices, all of those costs that have sort of been building. Making sure that those cars that you do have are priced to market. We stress this a lot, of course, and making sure that the margin opportunity is being realised in every car. That's really important, especially if you're less familiar with that sort of stock. So, have you got a plan in place for changes in fuel type supply? Is the stock mix the same as last year, and are you merchandising it right? And then are you pricing it to market? Those would be the three things that we'd sort of say to retailers. That's the sort of questions you want to be asking.
Yeah. Brilliant. Some really good stuff there, Mark. And it was really good to sort of hear, as we're approaching this middle part of the year, just a bit of a market update. But for today, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Well, that's it for today's Car Dealer Live. Join us again very soon. Bye-bye.